and Shruti Rupa Devi Dasi, carefully prepared meals that were nutritious and tasty but without ghee. Sometimes, however, he specifically requested certain fried foods but would later complain that they didn't agree with him. Rameshwara Swami, Gargamuni Swami and Bhavananda Goswami were sitting with Srila Prabhupada in his hut discussing deprogramming cases with him. They were saying that these enemies of ISKCON were so fanatical that for Srila Prabhupada to go to America would be dangerous. Srila Prabhupada interrupted, however, changing the subject. Our immediate problem, he said, is toward my health. I am not digesting food, therefore there is some swelling in the hands and the legs. Is it affecting your translation work? Asked Rameshwara Swami. That it is not affected, said Prabhupada. It is going on. I have translated 17 volumes. That may not be affected. He reached over and turned on the dictating machine, and they heard a few seconds of his most recent dictation from the 24th chapter of the 9th canto. We know you have a very low opinion of doctors, said Rameshwara Swami. I wish to die without a doctor, Prabhupada said. I may be seriously ill, but don't call a doctor. Chant Hare Krishna, don't be disturbed. Everyone has to die. Let us die peacefully without a doctor. All this medicine, injections and prohibitions, this, that. Chant Hare Krishna and depend on Krishna. Nartasya Chargadam Udvanti. That is Prahlad Maharaj's verse. Find out this, 7th canto. Very sorry reached to Prabhupada's bookcase for the 7th canto, volume 2 of Srimad Bhagavatam. Within a few moments he found the verse and read aloud. My Lord Nrsimhadev, O Supreme, because of the bodily conception of life, embodied souls neglected and not cared for by you cannot do anything for their betterment. Whatever remedies they accept, although perhaps temporarily beneficial, are certainly impermanent. For example, a father and mother cannot protect their child. A physician in medicine cannot relieve a suffering patient, and a boat on the ocean cannot protect a drowning man. These are facts, said Prabhupada. That's ultimately, said Gargamuni Swami, but maybe we could give you some temporary relief, because when you are ill we feel, yes, Prabhupada conceded, but no severe treatment should be accepted. Better not to take, better to chant Hare Krishna. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
I was asked to speak a little bit about Ramananda Roy today because it's his, is it appearance day?
Disappeared.
Oh, disappearance day. So I'm just going to read a little bit from the chapter of Chaitanya Charitamrita. So just the introduction to the chapter talks between Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and Ramananda Roy. Om Namo Bhagavate Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Jaya Sri Chaitanya Jaya Nityananda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Jaya Dvaita Chandra Jaya Gaura Bhakta Vrinda
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna 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 Hare Hare
Hare Krishna Krishna Hare Hare,
Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare,
Hare Rama 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 Hare Hare.
Do you want me to read from here, Raghunath?
Please. Is this page, this piece of paper there as a marker, a little bit before where you are now?
Sri Ramananda Roy. The Gaura Ganadesha Tipika states that Ramananda Roy was formerly Arjuna. He is also considered to have been an incarnation of the Gopi Lalita, although in the opinion of others, he was an incarnation of Vishaka Devi. He was a most confidential devotee of Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu. His father Bhavananda Roy is the incarnation of Maharaj Pandu, and Ramananda Roy's four brothers Vaninath, Gopinath, Kalanidhi and Sudanidhi are incarnations of Yudhishthira, Bhima, Nakula and Sahadev. When Lord Chaitanya went to southern India, Sarvabhauma Bhattacharya advised him to meet Ramananda Roy, for he declared that there was no devotee as advanced in understanding the conjugal love of Krishna and the Gopis. The Lord met Ramananda Roy by the bank of the Godavari in Vijayanagara, and in their long discourses, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu took the position of a student, and Ramananda Roy instructed him, being empowered by the Lord himself. Chaitanya Mahaprabhu concluded the discourses by saying, "My dear Ramananda Roy, both you and I are madmen, and therefore we met intimately on an equal level." Lord Chaitanya also revealed himself as both Srimati Radharani and Sri Krishna, a form never before seen. Lord Chaitanya advised Ramananda Roy to resign from his government post and come back to Jagannath Puri to live with him. Although Chaitanya Mahaprabhu refused to see Maharaj Prataparudra because he was a king, Ramananda Roy, by a Vaishnav scheme, arranged a meeting between the Lord and the king. Lord Chaitanya once said, "Although I am in the renounced order of life, still my mind is sometimes disturbed upon even seeing a wooden form of a woman. But Ramananda Roy is greater than me, for he always remains undisturbed even when he touches a young woman." Only Ramananda Roy was endowed with the prerogative to touch a woman in this way. No one should imitate him. In Jagannath Puri, Srila Swarup Damodar Goswami, another topmost Rasika Vaishnava, joined Ramananda Roy to intimately serve Sri Gauranga Mahaprabhu. Together they helped the Lord taste the loving ecstasies of Madhurya Ras. Sri Chaitanya would stay up all night, enraptured in Srimati Radharani's mood of separation from Shyama Sundara, singing his own poems and the poems of Vidyapati and Chandidas. Ramananda Roy would delight Lord Gauranga with his enchanting melodies. When Mahaprabhu felt intense separation from Sri Krishna, only Ramananda's talks about Krishna and Swarup Damodar's sweet songs kept him alive. Sri Ramananda Roy was the author of Jagannath Vallabha Nataka. Sri Ramananda Roy ki. So today's verse is from Chaitanya Charitamrita Madhya Lila, chapter 17. The Lord travels to Vrindavan. So we're beginning from text 180. Tatapi Puri Deki Tanra Vaishnava Acharya. Okay, I'm just going to go through these. So this is not the verse today. Tatapi Puri Deki Tanra Vaishnava Acharya Shishyakari Tanra Vikshakairangika. Although the Brahmin belonged to the Sanodiya community, Srila Madhavendra Puri had seen that he behaved like a Vaishnava and had therefore accepted him as his disciple. The food he had cooked had also been accepted by Madhavendra Puri. Mahaprabhu Tanri Adi Bhiksha Magila Tanya Kari Se Viprakaita Lagila. Therefore, Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu willingly requested food from the Brahman, and the Brahman, feeling natural humility, began to speak as follows. Tomare Bhikshadib Bhadyabhagya Seyama Tumi Ishwaranaye Toma Vidya Vyavaha. It is great fortune for me to offer you food. You are the Supreme Lord, and being in the transcendental position, you are not restricted in any way. Text 183. Loka, Karibeka, Tomara, Nindana, Moka Loka Karibeka, Tomara, Nindana,
Moka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana,
Sahite, Na, Harimu, Se, Dushte, Tushtera, Vachana, Sahitena Parimuse, Tushtera, Vachana, Loka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana, Sahitena Parimuse, Tushtera, Vachana, Loka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana, Saitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana,
Murka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana, Sahitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana, Murka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana, Sahitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana,
Vaishnavis,
Murka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana,
Sahitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana,
Sahitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana, Murka Loka Karibeka Tomara Nindana,
Sahitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana,
Sahitena Parimuse Dushtera Vachana,
Moka Loka, foolish persons, Karibeka, will do, Tomara Nindana, blaspheming you, Sahitena Parimu, I shall not be able to tolerate, say, those, Dushtera Vachana, words of mischievous persons. Translation. Foolish people will blaspheme you, but I shall not tolerate the words of such mischievous people. Please repeat. Foolish people will blaspheme you, but I shall not tolerate the words of such mischievous people. Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada, Srila Prabhupada ki. Srila Bhakti Siddhanta Saraswati Thakur remarks that although the Brahman did not belong to a superior community, he fearlessly chastised so-called caste Brahmins because he was situated on the platform of pure devotional service. There are people who are opposed to Sri Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's accepting a Vaishnava belonging to a lower caste. Such people do not consider Mahaprasadam transcendental and therefore they are described here as murka, foolish, and dushta, mischievous. A pure devotee has the power to challenge such high caste people, and his brave statements are not to be considered proud or puffed up. On the contrary, he is to be considered straightforward. Such a person does not like to flatter high-class Brahmins who belong to the non-Vaishnava community. Omagana Timarandasya Gananjana Shlakaya Chukshuramaritam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobisham Shtapitam Yena Bhutale Swayamrupgatam Hayam Tadati Swapatantikam Vandeham Shri Guru Shri Uttapadakamalam Shri Guru Vaishnavam Shra Shri Rupam Sagujatam Sahagana Raganatam Vitam Tam Sajivam Sarvetam Sabhadutam Harijana Saitam Krishna Chaitanya Devam Sri Radha Krishna Padam Sahagana Lalita Shri Shakam Vitam Shah He Krishna Karuna Sindhu Dinabandhu Jagatpate Gopisha Gopika Kanta Radha Kanta Namostate Tapta Kanchana Gaurangi Radhe Vrindavaneshwari Vrishabhanu Sutadevi Pranamami Hari Priye Vanshika Patarubhyascha Kripasindhubhyevacha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasari Gaura Bhaktivinoda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. So it's nice in the Srila Prabhupada Chaitanya, the chapter is called Chant Hare Krishna and Fight. And Srila Prabhupada there was displaying very much a fighting mood about really preaching very strongly against the illusions of materialistic propaganda, which puts the health of the body as paramount. So also in this verse in Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada is commenting that this Sanodiya Brahman, who is hosting Lord Chaitanya in Vrindavan, and then by the estimation of the smarter Brahmins, or the Brahmins who are absorbed in class consciousness and who are very proud of their being members of what they see to be a superior class of human beings, then they considered this Sanodiya Brahman to be of a lower lineage, and that however, although the Sanodiya Brahman understood that he wasn't respected so much in Brahman society, but still he was very emphatic, and that if anyone criticized Lord Chaitanya for taking food from him, then he would very vehemently argue that it was correct for him to do so, because food offered with devotion to the Lord is transcendental and can't be contaminated or can't be diminished by any material consideration. So this was Srila Prabhupada's whole presentation of the Vedic and Vaishnava philosophy, both in his preaching against the inaccuracies of the caste system and the inaccuracies of the smarta Brahman hierarchy, and also against his, he also very strongly asserted in his preaching in the West that Krishna consciousness is not another religion, but it's actually the eternal philosophy, the eternal education of the soul. Actually, the word education, the English word education comes from the Latin educare, which means to draw out the essence from inside. And so Srila Prabhupada, he was presenting Krishna consciousness as the real eternal, not the religion, but the eternal education. So, similarly, Srila Prabhupada, he wasn't fazed in the least by criticism from, in India, by the smarta Brahmins and the different caste-conscious persons. And also in India, he might have also been criticized for, he was criticized on many different fronts. He'd be criticized for deviating from the caste-conscious Brahminical understanding by one group of people, and then by the kind of more sort of so kind of liberal Hindus who are more like from the Advaita standpoint. And he was criticized for being too conservative and too right-wing and too much like stressing that the teachings of the Bhagavad Gita and of Krishna Bhakti were the actual origin of all other teachings. So he was constantly like he had to like walk a very fine line, and actually that actually he liked that. He liked being on that edge, that razor's edge of like truth, and he was a great fighter, both as a manager of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness, but also as a great preacher of the super excellence of Krishna Bhakti. And so we were reading in the Srila Prabhupada Chaitanya that while Srila Prabhupada was in Bhubaneswar and he was very ill at that time, then he was his disciples were relating to him that there was some cases of some court cases were being lodged against the Krishna consciousness movement. So I just thought it's interesting how I was going to go upstairs to study some verses from the Srimad Bhagavatam, but for some reason when I went up to the Brahmachari library, I just thought, Yogeshwara, who I listened to recently talking about Srila Prabhupada, I thought I like his presentation of Srila Prabhupada's teachings. So I just looked, and he devotes, and so just like as we have chant Hare Krishna and fight, so the last chapter of Yogeshwara's biography of Srila Prabhupada is called Armed with Yoga, Stand and Fight. And so it's describing this time of a kind of a great an organized condemnation of ISKCON by scholars, politicians, deprogrammers, fundamental Christians. Large numbers of people actually kind of seem to like get behind a court case that was lodged against ISKCON at that time. So I'm just going to read from this. So in 1976, along with the growth of the Hare Krishna movement came a proliferation of psychologists who delighted in diagnosing why the movement was growing at all. Solemn discussions and learned symposia were held to discuss what could possibly be fueling young people's passion for such an exotic faith. Why did followers chant for so long and shave their heads? What compelled them to leave their homes and schools for life in a bizarre and foreign culture? A battery of researchers descended on ISKCON temples with analytical tools and the vocabulary of their trade: subversion mythologies, cognitive dissonance, alienation. By such assessments, Prabhupada had not created a Western world branch of Chaitanya Vaishnavism, such as a revitalization movement that exploited disenfranchised youth with abasements, degradations, and profanations of self. Professors of Hinduism as well raised doubts over the legitimacy of Krishna consciousness. Prabhupada walked an ideologically thin line. On one side stood academics accusing him of inventing his own version of Vaishnava faith, and on the other reporters depicting his students as mentally confused hippies with prayer beads. Military commander that he was, he took the offensive and instructed disciples to prepare a pamphlet titled "The Krishna Consciousness Movement is the Genuine Vedic Way," containing the transcript of a correspondence with Dr. J.F. Stahl, Professor of Philosophy and South Asian Languages at the University of California, Berkeley. Stahl refused to accredit a devotee-organized course on the UC Berkeley campus, telling reporters from the Los Angeles Times that devotees spend too much time chanting to develop an actual philosophy. He proceeded to challenge the very legitimacy of Prabhupada's Krishna-centered interpretation of the Bhagavad Gita. In their exchange of letters, Prabhupada responded to Stahl with a volley of scriptural references to substantiate the practice of chanting as the prescribed yoga for the modern age, and Krishna as the goal of the Gita's philosophy. Some of the strongest antipathy towards Prabhupada's movement came from irate parents. Confused and frightened by the changes Krishna consciousness had imposed on their families, a growing number of mothers and fathers pinned hopes for their children's redemption on a radical cure. Prabhupada asked that all of the leaders of the movement assembled in his Vrindavan quarters. He would not allow ignorance or prejudice to stop his mission, and the leaders of his society needed to rally. The real issue, he told them, was that a devotee's life of simple living and high thinking challenged capitalism's propaganda for consumption and indulgence. The whole Western civilization is threatened, he said. Theoretically, if people give up meat eating, smoking, gambling, intoxication, and illicit sex, then their whole civilization is finished. And the most dangerous point is that young people are taking part. This wasn't brainwashing, he said, just common sense. He asked Hari Sori to tell the gathering about similar charges brought against the movement in Australia. The Sydney City Council tried to have us banned, Hari Sori said, but they lost the case after spending thousands of dollars and hundreds of hours trying to get rid of us. A newspaper reporter interviewed a psychiatrist and asked why there had been such strong reactions to a few people singing and dancing in the street. The psychiatrist said it was because city dwellers felt threatened by our simple lifestyle. Just see, Prabhupada commented, this whole Western civilization is threatened, so you have to fight with all the resources that we have got. Brainwashing, actually, you have no brain. We are giving you a good brain. That is our mission. Tell them like that. Expose them. Prabhupada derided the charges as ludicrous. He had not kidnapped anyone. He presented Bhagavad Gita as it is, and people were responding. Why paint him with the same brush as scammers and false prophets? As a child growing up in Calcutta, he had witnessed such pretenders taking advantage of his father's charitable nature by begging alms in the name of God, but then using the money to support their sex and drug habits. The science of bhakti lived at the opposite extreme from such hypocrisy. It is not a so-called religion, he said. It is a culture for the benefit of the whole human society. That was Chaitanya Mahaprabhu's mission. People are in darkness. The Vedic injunction is tamaso ma jyoti gamaya, come to the light. The first ignorance is thinking that this one lifetime is everything, 100 years at most. So let us eat, drink and be merry, because then everything is finished. The professors think like that, the politicians think like that. So our first business is to convince people your life continues after death. Krishna consciousness was nothing he had invented, he repeated. The knowledge has been there all along in the ancient Sanskrit text. Therefore I am working so hard on these translations. This is my life and soul, according to the order of my Guru Maharaj. Hold a meeting among the Gaudiya Vaishnavas here in Vrindavan, and I will explain the position. The irony of proving Krishna consciousness to be a religion when Prabhupada was emphatic that it was not, promoted discussion. On the one hand, Bhakti Yoga was the only yoga that did not end with the body. Devotion was the inherent nature of the soul. It had no point of origin in historic time, as did the world's many religions. On the other hand, zealots seeking to destroy the Krishna consciousness movement based their prosecution on that very assumption. The movement, they argued, had no standing in history. It had no provenance, as did authentic religious traditions, and was therefore an invention. While Bhakti defined the eternal nature of life, evidence thousands of years old attested to Bhakti's antiquity in India. It was this dimension of his movement, its antiquity in historic time, that would be their best defense. Once this movement gained historic legitimacy, devotees would be empowered to speak about its deeper dimension, the part that originated in transcendence. Prabhupada, always ready with an apt analogy, compared their game plan to using a thorn to remove another thorn. And they would use Bhakti's history to prove it lived outside history. Lawyers for the prosecution leaked a rumor to the New York police that Adi Keshava, the New York temple president and one of the defendants at the court case, was a flight risk. And on the pretext of needing information, police called him in. He arrived in devotee garb. Once inside the door, 2 police officers pushed him to the floor, braced his neck with their boots, handcuffed him and threw him into a holding tank. Over the next several days, police moved the young devotee from one jail to another to avoid detection by the press. As they escorted him into one downtown facility, an enterprising photographer snapped away. A photo of Adi Keshava in orange robes and handcuffs ran in the next edition of Time magazine. In prison he met Big Mac, a sympathetic guard with a big stomach and blonde afro. "You don't want to be in that funny dress," Big Mac told him, "not in here. Tell him you're concerned for your safety and you want your own cell." Adi Keshava managed to get himself transferred to a cell closer to a phone. He placed a few calls and his lawyer secured his release on bail. The next day he booked a ticket to Delhi and arrived in Vrindavan to consult with his spiritual master. Prabhupada's energy had begun to abate, age and constant travel beginning to take their toll on an octogenarian, but seeing Adi Keshava revived him, and they launched into a discussion about how to defend Krishna consciousness in court. There were 2 opinions: attack the charges on their legality or pursue a First Amendment defense of freedom of religion. The choice was obvious. Adi Keshava was to wear full devotee dress with shaved head and tilak face marking, and he was to appear in court with the entire library of Prabhupada's scriptural commentaries. "This will be a high point for our movement," Prabhupada predicted. Adi Keshava described that the press were attempting to bias public opinion against Krishna worship by saying that devotees were austere zombies who spent nothing for their own comfort. Prabhupada took it as a compliment. "They are correct," he said. "We don't go to restaurants, we don't go to cinema, and we don't spend lavishly for dress." Then looking around the room at disciples sitting on the floor, he added, "or furniture," eliciting a chuckle from his audience. "We live very simply. Whatever funds we have, we print books. Which point do they find faulty? Our only business is to establish Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So actually, I'll stop there, you can read it yourself. But I felt that point was actually very powerful. That, just as Srila Prabhupada saw that as a compliment. And that in the verse that we're studying today, I felt kind of unqualified really to speak about it because Srila Prabhupada says in the purport, referring to the Sanadiya Brahman, that a pure devotee has the power to challenge such high caste people, then his brave statements are not to be considered proud or puffed up. So obviously Srila Prabhupada was, he had that power to challenge all criticism of his movement. And he also encouraged his disciples to do the same, but not necessarily to do so in the same way that he did, but to really, because he'd spent a whole lifetime preparing for preaching in America, and then even when he came to New York, he spent a whole year more or less alone in New York. And he said that he was going out every day and observing how people's conditioning was, keeping them in ignorance, and he was thinking about how he could preach. So now in ISKCON, I think most devotees here would agree that we have pure devotees in ISKCON, but but they don't have to advertise themselves as such, and in fact they don't feel it's appropriate to do so. But it was appropriate for Srila Prabhupada to say that he was a pure devotee, because he'd been chosen by the Guru Parampara to be the founder Acharya, and it wouldn't be appropriate to suggest that the Guru Parampara was going to choose someone who wasn't a pure devotee. So we do also understand that Srila Prabhupada wanted all of his disciples to become pure devotees. And actually on certain occasions he said that his disciples were all pure devotees, but not that they were Uttama Adhikaris, but they were pure devotees because they had pure faith in him and pure faith in the process. So, if we have that level of pure faith in the process and in the Sampradaya and in our Guru, then we will be empowered to speak. But at the same time, we should also always consult with our community leaders. We should consult with devotees in our immediate community and consult with our mentors before we make any bold statements, and before we think that we're empowered to represent Srila Prabhupada or empowered to represent the Guru Parampara. Because ISKCON has strategies for executing Srila Prabhupada's mission. It has plans, it has different ways of presenting Krishna consciousness in different parts of the world, in different communities, through different media. So, that's it. That's even if we are considering that we're sufficiently advanced and sufficiently detached. So, for example, if we fall into this category of devotee who lives very simply, that we don't go to restaurants, we don't go to the cinema, we don't spend lavishly for dress, we're not attached to furniture or any comforts, we're willing to take on all austerities to push forward Krishna consciousness. If we're considered in that category, then we can put ourselves forward, I'd like to do some preaching or whatever. I'd like to, if we have any ideas, we can put them forward to our temple authority or to our GBC or to our spiritual master. But even if we're not in this category, even if we feel that we're not on that level of renunciation, we can still work hard to help those devotees who are our leaders. And Srila Prabhupada wanted all of his followers to do that. It's not that just because we're not detached, we're not in the renounced order of life, we may be attached to certain comforts, but we can still work very hard and live very simply as we possibly can. And just like in that past time in Bhubaneswar, when Srila Prabhupada was very sick and he was preaching like the highest level of renunciation, not to accept any doctors or any medicine, but still he allowed Gargamuni to administer some medicine perhaps, or some diet that would enable Srila Prabhupada to be a little comfortable. So similarly, we can take medicine and we can design a diet for ourselves that allows us to work and to serve those devotees who are more renounced. We can do that, but we shouldn't allow that to cloud our understanding of the philosophy, and we shouldn't allow that to take us into the camp of non-devotees who might say that, it's unrealistic to be renounced. No, it's not unrealistic, it's just that we've just made so much a mess of our lives that we can't live that life of renunciation. But if from birth we'd been born into a family and gone to Gurukul and lived like brahmacharis and really understood that this body is Krishna's property and I need to look after it so I can serve Krishna's devotees, then we would be very renounced and we would be very, very powerful creatures. So let's not allow our own inability to tolerate austerity or pain. Let's not make that a philosophy, because people will come to our temple who are very renounced, not necessarily because they've been brahmacharis, but because perhaps from an early age they've understood that there's a lot of people suffering in this world, so why should I indulge in being a hedonistic person at the expense of other people? There are a lot of children who there are a lot of children who give away all of their money when they see other people suffering in other parts of the world, and so there's a lot of people who are very, very renounced. So we may feel that we're not capable of teaching them because I'm not renounced, so how can I teach these more renounced people who are coming here? Well, we can do that by just studying Srila Prabhupada's books and being really convinced of the philosophy. Like a doctor, a doctor, for example, may have abused his body as a child, but if he's really studied the subject, he can still impart. He can give medicine to people. He knows how medicine can cure others. So it isn't necessarily the case that we have to be completely, renounced to be able to teach the principles of renunciation to others. But as I say, we mustn't be attached to a philosophy of sense gratification. So I'll stop there. Are there any questions or comments? Raghunath Prabhu?
Hare Krishna. Just about renunciation, well, it is a kind of significant part of Krishna consciousness, isn't that our but the real thing that we're sharing is Krishna Bhakti, and renunciation is a byproduct of acquiring a higher taste. And as you mentioned, we didn't grow up and don't have that austere backgrounds, but our fundamental principle is acquiring that attraction to Krishna, and then the renunciation follows as a byproduct of that. And of course Prabhupada wanted us to simplify our life, but that will be kind of quite different for different people in different circumstances. So
Yeah, well, yes, true, Prabhupada. Yeah, well, that's interesting. Thank you. I'm glad you mentioned that, actually. Raghunath Bhattacharya is a great friend of mine who always reminds me that the real purifying process which will bring purification is hearing and chanting about Krishna. So, so one verse that Srila Prabhupada quotes a lot when he's encouraging us not to become intoxicated by the attractions of materialistic life is a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, Canto 2, Chapter 9, text. Canto 2, Chapter 3, Text 19. Shvavidvara hoshtra karai samshrita parasha pashu nayat kana patope tu jatu nama gadagraja. Men who are like dogs, hogs, camels and asses praise those men who never listen to the transcendental pastimes of Lord Sri Krishna, the deliverer from all evils. And then the next verse, one who has not listened to the messages about the prowess and marvellous acts of the personality of Godhead, and has not sung or chanted loudly the worthy songs about the Lord, is to be considered to possess ear holes like the holes of snakes and a tongue like the tongue of a frog. Yeah, so as you say, so even if we are extremely renounced, even if we can live, without any opulent food or without any furniture, even if we can take cold baths in the middle of winter, but if we're not listening to the transcendental pastimes of Krishna, and we're not singing and loudly chanting songs about Krishna, then all of our austerities will go in vain. It's described that austerity just performing austerity without nourishing the soul with spiritual nectar, it causes the heart to become hard, causes the heart to become steel-framed. And after some time, if we're just performing austerity without that nourishing nectar of Krishna Leela, then the heart will become so hard that it's very difficult for us to actually taste that sweetness. So, Krishna set that example in his own childhood pastimes when he went to, he accepted a life of a brahmachari with Balaram, and they went to Ujjain and accepted a Kula Guru, Sandipani Muni, and they so they would hear about all of the pastimes of the different great devotees, and they would hear Srimad Bhagavatam, and they would hear, but they would also learn how to be very renounced at the same time. But Srila Prabhupada said that if we haven't had that training, then we can be renounced by engaging all of our time in hearing these nice pastimes, singing those songs, dancing in ecstasy, taking Krishna prasadam. So it's simple, but it's also extremely sweet and nourishing. And it requires an expert teacher to be able to administer that sweet medicine in a way that actually is nourishing, and to as I said, ISKCON is now a worldwide movement that's trying to fine-tune the culture that Srila Prabhupada gave us. Srila Prabhupada was like traveling throughout the world, like knocking down the pillars of society, really. Like he was like, with the force of his Krishna Bhakti and the force of his philosophical strength and his managerial strength, he was like a pioneering soldier, like knocking down all the obstacles that allowed ISKCON to survive. So even though it was like very difficult, it was very rocky after Srila Prabhupada left, but still now it's gaining more and more strength. So now we're just trying to apply Srila Prabhupada's directions and the directions of all of our previous acharyas in a way in which we can simultaneously train our children to be very renounced and simultaneously to develop Krishna Bhakti. But as you say, if however someone does actually develop Krishna Bhakti, if they do develop Krishna Bhakti, then they will automatically become renounced. But we can't just rely on that developing Krishna Bhakti. Actually, there's one verse, I don't like this verse at all, actually. There's one verse, I really do not like this verse. It's in the Bhagavad Gita, and I don't know if I can find it. But anyway, but it basically, Srila Prabhupada says, let's see. So this is in the, I don't know if this is exactly it, but anyway, this is the one I found. This is Prabhupada speaking in chapter 3 of Bhagavad Gita, text 42, purport. With intelligence, one has to seek out the constitutional position of the soul and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness by complete surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger. And even though the senses are very strong serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of the intelligence and mind, and the senses also, still unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind. Anyway, that's not the one, but anyway, that's... and anyway, that's... unless the mind is strengthened by association with Krishna in Krishna consciousness. Yes, so thank you for bringing that up. Yeah. Okay, stop there. Shri Chaitanya Charitamrita ki,
Jai.
Srila Prabhupada ki,
Jai.
Shri Ramananda Roy ki,
Jai.
Nitai Gaura Premanandi.
Haribo. His Grace Javat Vasi Prabhu ki.
Jai.
Jai.
Ananta Koti Vaishnav.